Well, good afternoon, everyone, and good morning from the West Coast, and welcome to our first educational challenge of the day, Endpoint Device Management, Securing the Academic Perimeters. I'm Hugh Burley, the moderator for this session, and I'm the Information Security Director at Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops, British Columbia. With me today are Sajeev Vijayakumar and Matt Balcer. I'm going to let BJ and Matt introduce themselves. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, hi guys. I'm Matthew Balcer. I'm the Senior Solutions Engineer for Sentinel One here in Canada, and I'm happy to be part of this panel, happy to be part of this challenge as we talk about, the different challenges of securing the education workplace, if you will, and keeping it safe.
Yeah. Hi, guys. My name is Sajeev Vijayakumar. I'm the Director of Information Security for Ontario Tech University and Durham College. And I'm definitely excited to be part of this panel and excited to have this discussion with you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Sajeev and Matt. Well, we were chatting before the session started about the differences in the university sector, and we started talking about trying to pound a square peg into a round hole, and realize, well, universities aren't either. We're kind of that triangle when you've got a square peg or a peg and a square peg and a round peg. So I think that kind of sets us up for the discussion today. So we've all gone through this pandemic, and Sajeev and I have both acknowledged that we were not ready for this. Our staff and faculty were out the door in a matter of days, and trying to access systems remotely when our VPNs weren't quite ready, our endpoint security wasn't quite ready, and we had to scramble to get there. So let's jump right in, and this is really about letting Matt talk about the what he thinks. And according to you, Matt, how do you think the pandemic impacted the way you think about endpoint management within the academic environment?
I mean, the first thing, and it sort of came up on the morning talk show, is somebody mentioned perimeter, and my immediate reaction was, what perimeter? So, the whole challenge of endpoint management, used to be, well, it was controllable, right? I had some form of perimeter. And then 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we started talking about cloud and everything else. And then that sort of changed the way we thought about perimeter, but we could still sort of keep it contained, because at least that cloud, whether it was public or private, was part of our network or the organization's, the institution's network. Pandemic hits last March. I don't have time to extend that perimeter. I don't have time to redefine that perimeter. The perimeter became wherever any of my users were at that moment. Refined, locked down to their house, working in uncontrolled networks, controlled networks, it didn't matter. So I think what changed was the ability to control the variables, right? And all that ended up with was, so, back in the day, if I was worried about where I was vulnerable, it was pretty easy to define. I looked at all my assets and said, okay, I need to be aware of the vulnerabilities of these assets. If my perimeter is gone, and my perimeter is now this student's home network, this professor's home network, a cafe, everything out there, well, then I need to worry about, well, what about the assets I have no idea even exist? Like the TV that's also attached to the network. If I think of my network at home, I've got 4 TVs, 8 phones, a couple laptops, a couple pads, a bunch of other smart devices, and every single one of those has a variety of vulnerabilities that expose us to. So now the university assets or the education institute assets are exposed to those same vulnerabilities because my asset sits on that, or a user connecting to my environment is exposed to those. So I think that's how it changed, is just the loss of control. And what I hope it brings us back to is, I just need to now understand more flexible visibility so that I'm not caught and I don't have blind spots.
That's a great goal, of course, and one that will be incredibly challenging for us because we not only have the TVs and the home devices, we also have research equipment and lab equipment and medical equipment and such a variety of unique internet-connected systems. Not to mention our security systems, cameras and door locks and all those things that are now connected to the internet. But moving sort of into the discussion, and we started to state this as an imagined scenario, but for us it's very real. I think Sajeev will agree that we are really living this, and we're all glad to see the pandemic coming to an end, but we don't believe that we're going to see a full return to the campus. It's just not going to happen. We're already hearing from people that they prefer to work at home, some of them. We know that we have people traveling the world in the case of TRU, trying to engage international students, engaging in research internationally. So we do have that ongoing problem. This is not going to disappear with the end of the pandemic. So
absolutely, I can just add some context to that as well, Hugh. Absolutely, I think what Matt discussed and what you said, I totally agree with that. Moving forward, post-pandemic, it's going to definitely look different from how we used to operate. Even if we were sort of a 5 days in a week type of shop, that is definitely changing. We are getting feedback from, if you can do your job remotely, then why not? I think we need to get with the changing times. And it was a great point, Matt, what you made, when you said, yeah, typically a typical enterprise might have sort of 5,000 employees working across sort of 5 offices. Now that has become 5,000 offices now with the pandemic. So it has complicated sort of endpoint management a bit. It did add an additional layer of complexity. And also additional delays if you try to operate the traditional mode for the endpoint security. So, it has really forced us to rethink how we, approach endpoint management overall. We need a sort of a robust solution that, more like a unified endpoint management solution that, you covers your critical assets, your data, mobile devices, laptops, your BYODs, IoT is a big one, that has sort of a built-in intelligent feedback loop as well. So, the way I approach things is whenever I look at solution, look at something, it's always, you have to keep this basic equation in mind. Simplicity plus adaptability equals sustainability. So you need to make sure that whatever solution that we also is user friendly and the user are able to adapt to it as well. So definitely, I think these are some of the concerns that broader concerns that we need to keep in mind. Absolutely.
All right, so restating our challenge, here we are living in this world where currently pretty much all faculty and admin staff are remote. We will have some of them coming back in the fall, probably a majority of them, but we'll still have a large group of people who will never come back to their office and campus. We as academic institutions, as universities and colleges, are certainly still struggling to ensure that all the protocols and file sharing and application access and more aren't being ignored, right? We have to ensure that these home devices and other devices, of which there are a plethora, are secured. And we have to acknowledge that the risk is high. And this is something I did early in the pandemic. I actually raised that flag that we have moved from a medium risk at the university to high risk. And we have a formal risk assessment program here that we use to determine the risk level for the institution. So we have this high risk. We need an action plan for deployment still. We've worked through it this year, but let's face it, we still don't have bring your own device standards for the most part or policies. So it's hard to secure those devices that aren't or didn't come from the campus and already had security built in through gold images and our endpoint security solutions and other assets. So really, where are we going to begin with this? And Matt, I'm going to come back to you. How would you get the institution started And what are some of the tools and best practices that you would deploy?
Yeah, so I mean, the first piece of it is I think we have to help the organizations we work for. So whether it's a university, a school board, or whatever, I think we have to help them understand that they have to move away from the security assumption. I saw a lot of that at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was a problem that already existed. It just got emphasized through the pandemic, and that the problem was, okay, we need to be flexible. We're going to send everybody home because we have no choice. And the IT department is going to figure out how to make the institution adapt to that. We're going to deploy technology. You know, we talked about O365 before the show started and things like that. We're just going to, launch all of that, deploy all of that, and assume that security will follow, or assume that these solutions have security built into them. And it's not always true. In fact, it's rarely true, because those vendors that are selling you those solutions that made you more adaptable, made you be able to send people home, assumed the opposite. They assumed that you were going to apply a security layer that kept your institution safe while using their tool. And so that's the first step, I think, is move away from a security assumption. Assume that, there's been a lot of talk over the last 3 days during this conference, and I've heard it talked about a lot. We need to go to, I don't know if it's specifically the marketing term of zero trust, but we need to understand that you cannot trust that things you're going to deploy to make your institution operate will automatically have security, and therefore we cannot trust everything. We need to apply layers of security to make everything work. So the second piece of that is, if I'm going to start deploying tools, security tools specifically, then I need to deploy tools that make my team better. Looking for the Michael Jordan that makes Scottie Pippen better, right? So if I just go out and I select a tool because the technology's hot and it looks cool and everything seems fun, well, then I need to assume that that's a bad assumption that my team is going to be able to adapt to that technology immediately, or that they have a skill set that helps them. I need to go and get a tool that fits with my team's skill set and can help them adapt. So those two things, I think, are the place to get started. Then you can start to look at technology. Then you can start to look at tools. And I think the first step of a great tool is, how much visibility does it give me? How much, awareness does it help me with? Because that's the biggest thing. It all starts with visibility.
Yeah, I have to agree, Matt. Flying blind in security is a chronic problem. We never have the full visibility that we want as security practitioners, and there are issues around privacy that, of course, we have to acknowledge, that we don't want to intrude into people's personal information. But in order to protect the institution, we do need to have that full visibility into the state of systems, the behavior of individuals, and whether we have a significant threat on the horizon or even active at the time. What do you think, Sajeev?
Absolutely. I can definitely relate to sort of the Matt and your points as well. So deploying a new solution in the middle of the pandemic, it can be sort of a very dicey proposition. First, we must be sort of confident that the solution does what it claims it does, right? And it also makes sure it needs to align with your sort of business goals. Next, the solution has to be fast and easy to implement. IT stuff, especially in the education sector, they're already underwater, so they don't need one more challenge thrown their way. A new solution should only be adopted if it makes sense, and it makes our lives a little bit more simpler, and without demanding more of their time, right? And
that's a really good point, Sajeev, around the simplicity, because complexity is my enemy. I have too many tools, too many alerts. My analysts are overwhelmed. They're trying to configure very complex systems, multiple systems, covering multiple areas of information security. So I think that reducing complexity is a really key point for me, and something we could maybe delve into a little bit more. So when we think about endpoints, we have several components to that security as well. We have multi-factor authentication, we have the VPN, we have our endpoint security tool, whether it's EPP or MTD or MDR or XDR. You know, we've got all these acronyms that we throw at these things, and we quickly realize that maybe we need more than one tool at the endpoint. And then at that point we go, oh no, another administrative nightmare that I have to get my staff to deal with. And I have no resource. There's not going to be another body brought into our program this year or next year, or maybe the year after, or for a long time. So, yeah. Matt?
Yeah, no, 100%. You know, I mean, we have to face the facts that it's certainly not just an education problem, but it certainly is maybe perhaps glaring in education. We are not just in a skills deficit anymore. We're not just in a skills void anymore. I think in general, globally, are in a cybersecurity skills crisis. Like, you know, I've seen large, you know, Fortune 500 companies try and go out and get new resources, new skill sets, and they're having a heck of a time doing it. And they have all the financial resources in the world to do so, and yet they still can't get the people. So that's where, you know, I broached that subject of the tool needs to make people better. So you need to look at your team and then go, okay, so now I realize that at the endpoint level, I need something, and you talked about the different layers of it. Okay, I can assume that I'm going to put one tool in place that sort of makes sure that only the right person using the right credentials, using the, you know, the right behavior to get into the system is there. And then once that is confirmed, then I need to start to maybe look at their behavior, the system's behavior. And then I need to look at where, you know, they might get exposed or exploited, and then bad stuff seems to happen. And so when I look at those tools, I should be able to put anyone in front of it who has a moderate skill set. They shouldn't have to go through a month of training. It shouldn't take you a year to deploy properly. Because if those are the other variables at play, no matter how good your technology is, you are going to fail eventually. Someone's going to make a mistake. Someone's going to misconfigure something. Someone's going to make a miss, because the biggest vulnerability out there, and I've said it a couple times throughout the conferences this week, the biggest vulnerability we face is the human flaw. Systems are repetitive. They're programmed to do different things. Now we've built AI and those sort of things. That's fantastic. But to a certain extent, system behavior is pretty predictable. Human behavior is not. So most of the time we are going to see some, you know, exploitation of the human flaw to expose, you know, the institution. So that's not just a matter of a user making a mistake. That's a matter of my security individuals making a mistake. So one of the things we pride ourselves at Sentinel One, you know, and very selfishly, is we set out to make one of the most complex technologies applied at the endpoint, EDR. We set out to make it simple first, effective second. Now, turns out we were pretty successful at doing both, but the top priority was making an EDR tool that was usable. Because as people tried to migrate from antivirus, traditional endpoint tools, to those EDR, XDRs, these beautiful acronyms that our marketing departments are pushing everywhere, as you, the people using these tools, tried to migrate there, they face, well, okay, it's great that this is EDR and next-gen AV is better than the traditional stuff, but I'm not ready for it, right? Just like you weren't ready for the pandemic, I'm not ready for EDR, I'm not ready for XDR, because I don't have the people internally that have used it before. So make those tools useful, make them easy to use, I think everybody should be putting at the top of their criteria, in tool feature sets.
Good points. I think, yes, that reducing complexity is a really important issue. And I want to kind of hit on it one more time before we leave, because we really need to start considering the endpoint as something much broader than it used to be. We used to say the endpoint was whatever the individual was carrying or was sitting down to enter data into or access information with. But we considered servers and Internet of Things devices and research tools and applications to be something different, that needed a completely different set of tools to address their security. And there's still certainly some of that. But really, when I think about it now, they're all just endpoints, right? That's really part of that zero trust architecture. It's all endpoints. We need to secure all of them, regardless of what they are and where they are and how they're used and that sort of thing. Any comments on that, Sajeev?
Absolutely. I think you guys have nailed that on the head. It is about sort of the skill set that we have in our bench right now. Just constantly, we need that tool to be very user intuitive. Plus, we would need our folks to go in and make sure that they get much value out of what that tool is providing us, without kind of overburdening our guys, or going after sort of training on a constant basis, because the threat landscape is evolving. It's changing at a rapid pace, and just keeping on top of stuff or trying to go and acquire that additional skill to make that tool valuable to you, that just takes a lot of time. So that's where we want that tool to be sort of simplistic. We should have good reports that's coming out of the tool. So there's we should be able to just pull out that tool and make sure that we get some valuable information that we can take back and we can do something about it in terms of remediation and stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah, and the other thing Matt mentioned, of course, was people. And I hear Sajeev using guys, which is that classic Ontario
guys and gals
phraseology. Guys, all you guys, I meant you too, women. I'm trying to switch to people now. But anyway, our people are very difficult to come by. A trained information security analyst is not somebody you're going to hire at a university. You're going to have to get somebody who's either coming right out of school or has worked in IT in some other capacity and train them up. So that issue around reducing complexity is incredibly important. But Matt, let's get back to you. So we know we have this big problem. We know that we're understaffed, that complexity is a problem for us, that we need to secure all of these various endpoints. Could you demonstrate by way of examples how you might detect certain vulnerabilities and what your action plan would be? What would you do first, second, third?
All right, so I'll give you an example, right? So we can look at real life examples, right? There's Print Nightmare. That was, something that we're reading about over the past couple of weeks. Before that, there was Hafnium. Before that, there was Sunburst. Before that, there was the stuff from APT 29, and stuff that goes way back to 2016 when they attacked the DNC. So I'll use some examples that pretty much all of those have in common. What type of OS, and you guys can just nod your head, what type of OS do you have in your environment? Do you have Windows? Yep. Do you have Mac? Yep. Do you have Linux? Yeah. Have you guys started to look at cloud workloads like containers, Kubernetes a little bit? Yeah. Okay. So the hackers feed off that. So that's the first thing. The second thing they feed off is there's one thing in common with all of those operating systems. They all have vulnerabilities. And the easiest way to compromise that machine is to look at those vulnerabilities. You look at the ones that are most closely related to a very legitimate process. Like one of the old vulnerabilities was the vulnerability in Feature on Demand Helper in Windows. It allows you to access consent, modify the privileges on the machine, and elevate the user to an admin. One of the controls we've always tried to put in place is, hey, don't let the user be an administrator on their machine if that machine doesn't belong to them. If the machine is an institutional asset, don't let them be an admin. We hoped that that would stop them and or someone accessing their machine in a malicious intent from getting to the point where they could further compromise. Well, now that flaw, that open flaw, allows me to compromise the machine using very legitimate Windows processes, which most tools are simply not built to detect. So when I think about that, an attack that would maybe start there, my end goal will not be just to defend the specific attack. It will be to go from where I'm being the target, where I am attacked, to what we would refer to as resiliency, or some people will use interchangeably the word immunized. So I need to understand how the attack started, the root cause of it. I hopefully have a tool that is defending me against the attack, and that at the end will also give me the ability to become resilient against the attack reoccurring. So from first step is detection, the ability to look at the behavior of a system, even though I'm using legitimate asset or legitimate parts of an operating system, being able to tell the difference between when that legitimate resource is being used or abused. Then it's being able to correct, right? And so one of our unique features at SentinelOne is we have not ignored the fact that whether you're talking about EDR or XDR, there's an R at the end. That R stands for respond. That respond, that letter at the end does not mean, Hugh and Sajeev go out and hire 20 people who are firefighters, and when you have an incident can go out and correct everything and can, start scripting on machines and correct all the changes, which, could be in the hundreds, if not thousands per machine. And, maybe the university will be down for a couple weeks, but when we come back, we'll be fine and dandy. No, you need a tool that's going to do a lot of that correction for you. So one of the things at SentinelOne, like I said, is we focus on that R. We have automated autonomous response, both correcting machine changes and, any changes to the file system. And then getting me that root cause and potentially even parts of tools that can correct the vulnerability itself. Maybe Windows hasn't put out a patch for that feature on demand helper flaw yet. So I then need to do what we would call maybe virtual patching, which is, put restrictions on the application, put restrictions on the process, or at least alert me when that process is being accessed on the machine, so that when someone accesses feature on demand helper, I get an alert or I get some visibility to it, and I can then decide, oh, is this a normal application doing what it's supposed to, accessing feature on demand helper to get its privileges? Or is this again a pattern of some malicious actor accessing that, that feature to elevate their privileges and, do whatever their next step would be, exfil data, corrupt the machine, send you a ransom note, whatever they would need to do from there. So it's take the right steps, but have a tool that helps you along the way. Identify, detect, respond, immunize, and get yourself to resiliency.
Thanks, Matt. I certainly empathize with that, and reflecting back on Nightmare, our most recent incident. What was our first step? We had to spend a considerable amount of time and resource on actually turning down print spoolers on Windows systems. And then we had to wait for the patch. And then we have to patch. And, are we remediated? Did the patch really work? Maybe not the first one, but maybe the second one. That alone chewed up, I would guess, a day, 2 days of effort to address institutionally. So really good example, and something that is another area of automation. I'm very keen on automation and the value of it. I don't want to see stuff that's been fixed, to be honest. You can tell me about it later. I'll report to the board that we fixed a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. But we need to address the serious issues, and that means getting really astute alerts, things that really matter, where we only alert on where we can't automate. So I'm hoping that this next generation of tools, SentinelOne being one of them, really helps us in that area. Sajeev, any comments on that?
No, absolutely. I think the principle was we had to take a very similar approach, right? So we went and sort of, our resources were caught up trying to disable that service. First, the patch came out and they said, oh, patch is working. And then they said, oh, the patch is not fully effective. So we had to wait around until a sort of a solid patch came out. And then at the same time, and the approach that we took was, hey, let's just shut down the service if that's not required. And sort of the college and university wide, we disable the service if it's not required, unless it's a sort of a print server type of deal. And when we enabled it again, that's when we had the proper patch that was validated. We did it in sort of our dev and rolled it up to the production. So that did chew up some time on our bench. So like, tools like this, if there's any automation that's available to us, that'll immensely help and free up some of the cycles of our resources. Absolutely.
Great. So we have sort of touched on getting talented staff and bringing our team to the point where they can actually do the things that we need them to do. We've talked about trying to reduce complexity, but those people are still hard to come by. And we still need them to be able to train up on new systems. And it doesn't matter how simple we make it. You can't just sit somebody down and say, okay, just go figure this out. And can you figure it out before the next big attack comes? Because we'd rather not go down if we can avoid it. So let's delve into that a little bit. Sajeev, do you think we have the teams today that are adequately trained to support and manage the new normal of these diverse endpoints and trying to gain control?
That's a very good question, actually. So this is definitely a wake-up call for all the organizations. I feel like we are chasing sort of a moving target. Cybersecurity will sort of continue to grow, and as technology becomes more digitally connected, Internet of Things and cloud computing, they will have sort of a major impact on the growth of the security threats. So that means that for the need for the skills to combat these problems will grow. And security is just changing at a rapid pace. We're talking about zero trust, we're talking about SASE, we're talking about SDR, the list goes on. So personally, I feel like there is a constant need to upgrade skills, go after the training that, that's useful, and just even keeping yourself up to date to, really stay on top of things. That's where kind of, organizations are kind of looking more sort of for a managed services to kind of augment their existing bench. Because there's only so much upgrading that we can do with the existing resource. So that's where, tools like, filled with automation and tools that are sort of, cloud-based technology might help us, because when we go into the cloud and when we leverage something that's cloud-based, we become part of a sort of a larger collection of organization that are running very similar technology. So if we see some anomaly on our side, and we see some sort of data or something that looks a little fishy, that gets fed back into the system, so someone else can benefit from that. So I think there's definitely a gap. Like the big organizations are still looking for resources with skills, and it is something that we are constantly going after as well. But definitely tools and managed services and automation will turn to tools and automation for a bit of assistance to kind of augment our existing bench to help us with that.
Great, thanks, Sajeev.
Yep.
Matt?
Yeah, I think you made a great point there, Sajeev. Is one of the things I talk to customers a lot about is identify what you're good at and identify what you're not so good at, and don't be afraid to ask for help. There's a common misconception of, hey, managed service is really expensive. In some cases, it's expensive not to do that, right? I know from my experience with what we do here at SentinelOne, I can tell you getting a managed SentinelOne solution is far less expensive than you going out, buying our solution, and then hiring someone who would have a skill set to operate it from day one. Mm-hmm. So in some cases, if you already have that person on staff, fantastic. If you don't be afraid to look at something that might be a little bit more managed, somewhere where you might be able to get a little bit more help out of the gate, because it can be extremely costly to A, make a mistake, or B, try and patch that hole with a very expensive resource that we've said it since the beginning, might be pretty hard to find. The other aspect of that is, if there's one sort of industry that might be in a position to sort of self-feed themselves some resources down the road, is education. What I encourage a lot of, certainly in higher education type institutions, is, and maybe the technology department isn't where that starts, maybe it's in the administrative departments, is start building programs where you feed yourself. Have a cybersecurity program within your university, have a more in-depth technology program in your university, and build them into a stage at your own environment. What better place for them to learn in some of these very complex education environments? And you end up sort of self-staffing. Now, that's not an overnight solution. I'm not imagining it is, but that's where you can start with a plan and along the way get help, use managed services, and then slowly build up a situation where last March doesn't come around and catch us all flat-footed and, we're at a skills deficit and technology deficit.
Yeah, I think managed services are important components of our programs these days. But I also think, Matt, that we need to have quick access to training from our vendors, because the vendors know their products, but our people in information security know our institutions. And they can provide that really essential feet on the ground feedback to make sure that the managed service is running in a way that's truly effective for the organization. So how would you address that? Where is that going to come from? How do we get that quick learning? I need to learn this product quickly. I can't afford to spend 10 grand to learn it. Can you help me out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I truly believe it's the responsibility of every vendor of any solution, certainly security solutions, to have training as part of the solution, right? At SentinelOne, we have what's called Sentinel One University. So this is our own virtual university that does training on not just the product, but also other security skill sets. And you mentioned cost as part of that, right? And so I think the second responsibility, like the first responsibility is to have the solution to that. The second piece is making it accessible and affordable. Unfortunately, most of the time when an organization is sort of in a budget crunch, and I know it's the first thing they'll cross off on the quote is, the training. I can't afford that, don't need that. Find a way. Right. And it's a two-sided coin, right? The institution or the customer needs to find a way to build that into the budget, and the vendor needs to find a way to make that affordable enough that they can, right? So it's not $10,000. Maybe it's $2,000, maybe it's $1,000. Maybe they find a way to educate your entire staff instead of a, pay per trainee type scenario. Is be flexible and make it very accessible. And then don't just focus on your own solution. Don't do very basic administrator training and then leave people to figure out the rest. If you're a security company like we are at SentinelOne, don't be afraid to give someone threat hunting training. It's the next step. Sure, threat hunting within our tool, maybe, but threat hunting in general. Give them the ideology behind using the tool correctly. Get them to use the tool correctly, give them the ideology. They end up being a much better asset to the organization they work for. And then, when you walk away and you're looking at the end of the year of how you spent your budget, you're not so frustrated that, okay, we had to buy that pretty expensive solution, and on top of that, I had to spend another 10 grand just to get my people to use it. If at the end of the year you go, you know what? We bought an expensive solution. We paid a little bit to get them trained, but now I've got someone who's an expert on that technology, and not only that, has a different security mentality than they walked in with because they've been trained on the skills as well. So I think that's really important, is to be all encompassing when you look at training and that sort of thing, so you can really help organizations get ahead, not just find a new way to add money to the quote that you're sending them.
Absolutely, Matt. And I can't tell you how many times I've watched a very expensive solution be partially or poorly implemented, where training wasn't given, and it's never really reached its goal of provisioning the service it was intended to. So really important stuff. But assuming we get there, we actually do get the funding to train properly, that we do get the people up to speed to use the tools, that we do have the managed service in the background doing some of the important work. How does the institution then go on to be able to monitor all the protocols in the hybrid environment and actually get to that next step of, yes, we've got the solution, we've got the training. What's actually happening there? What are we really doing in that monitoring and remediating stage?
Yeah, I think the end goal, if you've done all those things you mentioned, Hugh, if you've done them all right, you should now be in a place where you're no longer reactive, right? If you've got the right people, the right tools, the right training, the right assistance, all those elements you've mentioned, you're no longer reactive. You're no longer the institution that's waiting and listening for the next, Microsoft announcement or news story about such and such a university got hit or such and such a school board got hit. You're the ones that are ahead of the game, that are now being proactive. Before things happen, you're able to, threat hunt in your environment, visualize your environment, understand where you might be exposed to, something that gets announced as a 0-day or a 0-day vulnerability. You're able to, within seconds, be proactive to that and get ahead of the game. Because, you guys have mentioned several times chasing the technology that got you up and running, chasing, the latest vulnerability or whatever it was. Is I don't want to be chasing anymore. I want to be the one that's hunting. I want to be like, not just in the sense of threat hunting. I want to be the one that's hunting the bad stuff, the indicators, before they occur in my environment, so that I'm not, ever caught with them. So if you do the things right, and you have a tool that helps you along the way, then you should be able to get there. Again, if I think about Sentinel One, how we've taken the game away from, okay, and I'm waiting on the reputation to get loaded into the antivirus, be turned into the DAT file. I got my 1,800 DAT file updates per day, and hopefully one of them contained, some sort of reputation that prevents me from the latest attack. That's not going to work anymore. So we got to have proactive technology that's looking at behaviors, that has known good and is able to look ahead and predict known bad, and then gives you the tools to identify ahead of time when your systems are acting abnormally. And like our storyline technology, which correlates and contextualizes all the different pieces of that, just doesn't dump data on you. Because my marketing department hates when I say this, but EDR, XDR, as far as I'm concerned, at least in its bare forms, causes way more problems than it will ever solve. Because in its simplest forms, it is just a massive data dump on you that you need to understand, you need to action, and you need to make proactive. If the technology itself is proactive, you've got a running head start. So our storyline technology does exactly that. As the events are collected from the different systems in your organization, as the network is discovered in your organization, and we're finding new IoT things, it's able to identify and fingerprint what is known, what is not known, what should be on your network, what shouldn't be on your network, what should be happening on your systems, what shouldn't be happening on your systems. And the information is all correlated ahead of time, so that by the time your team is looking at it, they've got a running head start, and they're going to take care of it.
Thanks, Matt. So that's great for the information security team. Can we actually help the end user with these tools in any way? I feel so sorry for people who are just trying to get their job done, and they're constantly under attack now. The endpoint is simply another vector of attack, and they're being attacked through every possible medium and technical vector. Can we actually, I mean, we can certainly reduce the incidents for them and try and keep them secure. No doubt that's helping them. And we can even, if we see something, we can talk to them and say, this is what we're seeing. Can we actually help them to help themselves with some of these tools?
I think we can, and you guys tell me. I think the biggest challenge, and we'll go back to last March again, the beginning of the the race to zero. What was the biggest issue? Was it that that the technology wasn't available, that it was impossible to have people work from their home offices, from their home classrooms, or what have you? Or was the problem adoption? You guys tell me. Was it adapting to the technology and the availability of the tools, or was it the inaccessibility of those tools?
I think it's definitely the adaptability. The solution was there. The security solution is there. It's just that how fast can we adapt to it? What is our skill set on the bench to kind of take that and run with it was the biggest challenge when we kind of that we were facing, just because it just happened so quick, right? We didn't have that time to plan it out. So its adaptability was a huge deal. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's how we can help them. Having a security solution that doesn't impact them, that protects them without them having to do anything, that they can go and behave how they always have, and maybe even adapt to a new reality without having to think about if they're presenting themselves with a massive risk, because it's significantly unnatural for them to think about that. When you say, okay, your classroom is no longer a chair and a desk and four walls, it's this application called Zoom. You've already forced them to change their behavior. You've already forced them to adapt to a new reality. They shouldn't have to adapt to new risks, to new complexity. So I think the best way we can help end users is by taking the worry away from them, because they're not going to worry anyway, but take that responsibility away from them. Don't assume that they're going to worry about, the vulnerabilities in their TV, their IP cameras and everything else. Assume that they're going to trust everything, and that they don't have the time nor the awareness to worry about those things. And so we, as both the IT staff or the security staff, need to worry about it for them, and the technology needs to assume that they're not going to be doing anything to protect themselves, that the solution needs to be almost self-protecting.
Yeah, and I'm just going to push back a little bit, Matt, because of course, when we sent people home over a matter of 3 to 4 days, and they took an institutional device, we went like, great, totally managed. You really don't have to worry. We've still got that under control. When you connect to the VPN, we're just going to take control of that device, make sure it's clean, stays clean, and you're not going to have to worry. What we weren't really planning for was the people who said, you know what, I've got a perfectly good device that I use all the time at home, never been hacked, no problems. I'm just going to use that. And those are the people who obviously need the help. They haven't given a lot of consideration to security. How do we deal with that? I mean, we're in the process of writing bring your own device policies now to try and address it and tell people what we think you need to do before you or when you connect that device. So how do we make that more seamless and easier for the end user?
So I think it's, about controlling what you control, and accepting that there will be things out of your control that you need to defend against. And the first part is identify, we talk about this more in the corporate world, but identify your crown jewels. Identify what you're willing to let an untrusted device connect to or access. So if I identify those things, I have no problem with their going to the school website. That's, to a certain extent protected. I don't care what kind of device they're using to access that. But a different type of service, you talked about, you have research facilities and things like that. Some of that might be proprietary information, proprietary research. Maybe I don't want some untrusted device connecting to those. So maybe I need to put access controls in front of that asset, whether it's a server that contains that data, a cloud resource that accesses that data, or what have you. I then need to assume that I've got no controls on the endpoint, but maybe I'm putting access controls in front of that solution. And I mean, gone are the days where we were really worried about NAC solutions. And you said now we've got more sophisticated, more intelligent, sort of CASB and VPN type solutions. I think those are definitely worth looking at, especially in education. If you're planning to go to a, bring your own device type scenario, is put the controls in front of what the people are trying to access, so that if you can't control the device, you can control what they're accessing. The second piece is we've got to constantly continue education in terms of, the right and wrong behaviors, on quote unquote endpoints, whether it's a phone, a tablet, a laptop, a desktop, or, your own staff accessing servers and things like that. We have to continue that education so that if we open the doors and make everything more accessible and, allow people to use whatever device they would like, which seems inevitable anyway, is that they know what's good and bad. And a lot of that is simple awareness of, the dangers of certain types of behaviors, that, you can't trust every website, you can't trust every email. These things seem almost redundant at this point, but it's so important to continue that education, so that if you do get put into a situation where you have to let them use their, I know my device has never been hacked and this and that. Well, 99% of the certainly home-based or individual user type attacks never get detected. So you wouldn't know if you were hit. You would never know if all your banking information's on the dark web. Do you have a dark web browser on that computer you trust so much? Probably not. And if you don't, then you have no idea what information of yours is out there.
Absolutely. So we are getting toward the end, and we do have some questions queuing up that we perhaps should address. So let me just read off one of these questions. So what are some of the concerns with integrating XDR solutions? How do you smooth the interoperability concerns? And this is an issue that is more or less top of mind for me, because we do have a solution that we've implemented for our endpoints. We still consider servers to be somewhat separate. And we're not sure that the solution that we have implemented does everything that we need it to do. That may not necessarily, for example, enforce the specific AB controls or next generation AB or MDR controls that we believe should be there. How do we make that easier? I mean, I hesitate to say it again, but I dread having multiple solutions on the endpoint. I just dread the idea of trying to manage that and forcing that on my people and having multiple sources of alerts and that sort of thing. What could we do to make that a smoother process?
So, I mean, there's two parts to that. The first is find one solution that does as much as possible on your list of, here's what I need to do to protect my endpoints, right? I agree with you full-heartedly that, nobody should be having, I ran into one customer that had 14 different security agents on their endpoints. That should never happen in any world. There are solutions out there that are efficient enough to do most, if not all, of what you need to protect and lock down an endpoint. So that's the first thing. I think you're right. It should not be a multi-solution, layered, all trying to do the same thing. Layered approach in security is great. Layered approach to do the exact same task is not great. And then the second part of that was integrations and not interfering with the complexity of applications and things you need to operate in your environment. So I think that comes back to that vendor responsibility. Have some way to help your solution deploy and integrate into environments seamlessly without having to spend weeks, months in a sort of stalemate state where you're trying to figure out where there's interoperability issues, where there's false positive issues, where you're impacting an organization's performance and productivity. So I think that comes back to mostly the responsibility of the vendors to build solutions that are interoperability aware. It's certainly something we are very conscious of at SentinelOne. We have an exclusions catalog. We have very detailed exclusion ability that will allow most of our customers deploy within 24 hours, right? And I'm talking massive environments, right? And that's because we've thought of that ahead of time. We thought of the issue of interoperability. So I think that's a big piece. There's some responsibility on the customer or on the institution, and that is be environmental aware, know what applications you have running, know what your critical stuff is, know where the possibilities of interoperability issues might lie. But you should be confident that your vendor can adapt to your reality as opposed to vice versa.
Great. Yeah, we're down to the last few minutes here. It is 10:57 out here in the West. God only knows what time it is out there in the East, probably afternoon sometime.
Closing in on 2 o'clock.
All right. We kind of danced around this a bit. What are those main components very quickly, Matt, that need to be in that endpoint security solution? What are the key things that need to be there?
Right. So, I mean, if we look at the acronyms, endpoint protection. So there should be protection mechanisms, something that will detect vulnerabilities, detect bad behavior, detect anomalies, detect lateral movement, and all the different forms and shapes and different ways that systems can be attacked. And so the first piece of those endpoint solutions should have that. There should be some protection component. Again, we talked about that being autonomous and automatic. Absolutely. The second piece is now we have these new acronyms of XDR and EDR. They contain detection and response. Detection, to me at least, is a little bit different than what I mentioned in the protection in terms of detecting bad things. Detection, for as far as I'm concerned, is visibility, being able to detect and see what is happening on the endpoint. And MITRE actually, they did an evaluation this year, and I think they hit the nail on the head in terms of looking at what really defines an EDR component. And their main thing was visibility. They launched an attack that had 174 steps in it. And actually how they measured the solutions is how many of those 174 steps did your solution see? And that's how they scored it. And I think that's a major component. And then the last one is response. And response isn't just, the classic kill and quarantine that every antivirus has had forever. It really is about restoring systems to their pre-attack state and getting you to resiliency. And again, we're going to mention that A word again, it's automation. The more that your team is relied upon to do that, the larger the chances that you're just going to fall behind. And so I think a good EDR solution should really have response mechanisms that correct system changes, that correct file manipulation, data manipulation, and also systems that allow you to isolate, respond, triage, learn lessons, and get to resiliency. And again, it should all be autonomous and automatic.
Great, thanks, Matt. Any last words, Sajeev? We've got seconds left.
It was a great discussion, and I was very glad that I was part of this panel. I learned a lot from Matt, yourself, and Hugh. Great job moderating as well. So thank you so much. It's been a great discussion.
Thanks, Sajeev, and thanks, Matt. I believe we're right at the end now. We've hit the 11 o'clock mark, so I will call it here.
Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in.
Thank you very much.